Cherokee Nation wants federal law to fix the black tribal citizens. Now, this is something that I did not realize, and maybe other people did, but as I said earlier at the top of the show, that there are a number of African Americans, blacks, who were slaves. Their ancestors were slaves, and I did not realize that indigenous tribes had slaves. And when slavery ended, those members were able to stay with the indigenous communities that they were a part of, and they became citizens. But apparently, there is something in the law that doesn't give them full quote unquote birthright, or I think they use the term blood right. Blood right. I'm gonna get into that in a minute. Citizenship of that nation. Why is that important? And this article talks about it. Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court has joined with liberals back when it was a much narrower court to uphold treaties that a bunch of these indigenous communities have made with the federal government, which a lot of these places like Oklahoma have just ignored. So they have for years had these treaties on the book that the state governments just completely ignore as if they don't exist. And Neil Gorsuch, I think about 3 years ago, who has always been an ally of the different indigenous nations, tribal nations, has said, look, the government made an agreement with this over 100 years ago, and we have to honor these agreements. And that put, by the way, Oklahoma, I think a couple of years ago, I cannot remember fully. Actually, I'll get into it. But that put Oklahoma on notice that they could no longer violate the agreements that were made between the federal government and these nations. And part of that agreement was over prosecutions. So if a crime is committed on tribal land, a tribal court handles it, and you get imprisoned through a tribal court, not state court. And the state of like Oklahoma and the rest of these places, Missouri, I think would be another one, have been fighting and took it all the way to the Supreme Court to overrule these tribal nations' own laws. And Gorsuch, along with the liberals at the time, sided with the tribal nations. So that's significant, right? Because that means that the laws on tribal lands, through their own means of meting out justice and meting out their laws, are handled on their land. And the government, the state government, cannot come in and interfere with that. Only federally could you do that, but the state government cannot come in and interfere with that. And again, as I just explained in the previous segment with respect to Tennessee, these state governments do not respect the laws of the local laws that they claim that they believe in. But in Oklahoma, they're being forced to by the Supreme Court. So this now, since that has happened, and since there is this protection, the Cherokee Nations now want to fix a loophole. And let's go into that right now. And this is by the way, Russell Contreras. And this is from Axios Online. This is yesterday, March 31st, 2024. And it says, one of the nation's largest indigenous tribes is seeking to change a 140-year-old federal law that governs criminal jurisdiction of tribal citizens on reservations based on blood quantum. The move by the Cherokee Nation comes as the Oklahoma tribe is welcoming the descendants of formerly enslaved people once owned by tribal members as citizens. Cherokee Nation Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr. tells Axios the tribe is asking Congress to revamp the 1885 federal law that focuses on Indian blood, quote unquote, a racial category many tribes now shun. Federal courts have interpreted that law to require tribal citizens charged in criminal cases on tribal land to have a certain blood quantum to be prosecuted in federal or tribal court instead of state. Hoskin says that the law discriminates Cherokee citizens of freedmen descendants who may be tried in state court with other non-tribal members and it needs to be updated for a new reality. Quote, it's about the United States respecting the tribal sovereignty and, frankly, catching up with the Cherokee Nation in terms of equality for all our citizens, including Cherokee citizens of freedmen descendants. Freedmen meaning slaves, former slaves, freed. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 2020 that a larger portion of eastern Oklahoma falls within an indigenous reservation, preventing state authorities from prosecuting offenses committed by Native Americans on tribal land. That is the case that I just referred to, where Neil Gorsuch sided with the liberals on that. And Oklahoma went back to court after, because at that time, um, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was still alive and on the court. She has since died in the court, changed its composition, and since that happened, Oklahoma went back to court to try and get the Supreme Court to undo what it had just done the year before, because the makeup of the court changed. You know, this is how we play the game now. So, but apparently, a lot of that law was still upheld. But so Oklahoma's pissed, by the way. The Republicans in Oklahoma are pissed because large portions, as this says, larger portions of eastern Oklahoma falls with indigenous reservation, meaning the government, the state government and local government, I would imagine, have no jurisdiction. Well, they are the local government. So the state government has no jurisdiction over prosecuting crimes. So the Tyree Nichols situation, if you had, for instance, cops pulling over an indigenous man in Oklahoma, you know, they'll tell Bill Lee to go kiss his butt because they cannot, who I believe is the, no, I think Bill Lee is Bill Lee? I have to take a look. But whoever the governor is of Tennessee, they can pass all the laws that they want, but it would not, if this were happening on indigenous land, those police officers, the state legislature, all of that would not have any bearing on the laws of the tribes. So it goes on to say, so the Supreme Court ruled in 2020 that large portions of Oklahoma, a red state, fall within indigenous reservations. But some black tribal members are still being prosecuted because they lack, quote, Indian blood, according to the New York Times. The Times highlighted a case involving Michael J. Hill, a black citizen of the Cherokee Nation who got into an altercation with police on tribal land. What did I just say? That is basically a Tyree Nichols situation in Oklahoma. He sought to have a case dismissed, arguing that as a tribal member in tribal territory, state officials were outside of the state's criminal jurisdiction, but courts ruled he did not have enough quote unquote Indian blood to make the claim. The Cherokee Nation Supreme Court ruled in 2021 that freedmen have the right to tribal citizenship, and the tribe soon approved changes to its constitution to include freedmen. The Cherokee Nation has around 15,000 enrolled citizens of freedmen descendant. Other tribes who once owned blacks enslaved people are resisting to include freedmen as tribal members. Black descendants of enslaved people once owned by members of the Muscogee Nation are seeking full tribal membership in a case that's now backlogged in the tribe's court system. Hoskins says that the Cherokee Nation and other tribes will step up their lobbying efforts in Congress to make the changes to federal law. He said that the tribe is also considering legal challenges through the federal court system. So this is an example of a situation in which the U.S. government, the federal government, is being called to task on its relationship between the tribes, the state government, and its people. This is a legacy of slavery. This goes to the legacy of African Americans, of tribal people, and of what treaties mean. And it is unfortunate, but I think this is a case where, unfortunately, the Congress is so broken that I don't think they'll get anywhere as long as we have Republicans taking control of both the House and the Senate. So good luck trying to push that through. But It is another example of state trying to, again, this happens, I want to say almost exclusively, but I don't know if I can make that claim. But we know that when it comes to federal government, how conservative, how Republicans feel about when the federal government comes in and overrides and overrules the laws of the state. They make this claim that the local governments, the ones closest to the people, should make the laws and should govern the people, right? That's how they feel about the federal government. On the state level, they completely do a 180. They reverse themselves. So this is just another example, just as Tyree Nichols was another example. Oklahoma has been fighting against having the indigenous tribes be able to rule themselves. And if it were not for Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court, the Oklahoma government would have dismantled an upstanding treaty that has been on the books for, what is that, 140 years? They would have completely dismantled that treaty that was made between the United States government and tribal lands in order to allow these right-wingers to continue to dominate the indigenous people in their government. So good for them. I hope that they succeed. Hey there, fantastic viewers. Eric Darnley Small here, and I hope you're loving today's episode of What You Missed. You've reached the end of today's show, but don't worry, there's more show coming up. If you're watching this on YouTube, please click the bell so that you'll be notified when more content is available. You can also help the channel by clicking the like and subscribe buttons. It helps the YouTube algorithm find new viewers so that I can keep bringing you all this incredible content you enjoy. But wait, there are more ways to support the show. You can make a contribution through the show's PayPal, which goes a long way in helping produce even better content for you. And consider becoming a part of our growing community by joining our Mastodon site at mastodon.vtip.me/@whatyoumissed for more engaging discussions and exclusive updates. And here's something you won't want to miss. Mark your calendars for our live show streaming on YouTube and stream.vtip.me Monday mornings, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Your support means the world to me, and together we're making What You Missed the best it can be. Thanks for being a part of my journey.